Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Grassley.
Ms. Schwer, in February, I reintroduced a bill that I call the Eagles Act, focusing on using behavioral threat assessment model to identify individuals showing pre-attack behavior and manage the threat to prevent targeted violence. How does behavioral threat assessment model prevent gun violence, if you think it does? And is this something worth expanding?
Sure. Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think when we're talking about behavioral threat assessment, the most often aspect in which it comes up is preventing, like you said, targeted acts of specifically mass violence. And I think it can be incredibly useful in that capacity. As Dr. Rainey mentioned, a lot of these perpetrators of mass violence, while they may not be diagnosably seriously mentally ill, a lot of them are in some sort of crisis. Most often it is noticeable in the weeks, sometimes months and years leading up to that incident. It's fairly rare that you have a perpetrator of mass violence who, when all is said and done, people turn around and say, oh, we never saw that coming. Most of the time it is fairly identifiable beforehand. And so that training in professional threat assessment, helping people identify those factors and then knowing what to do about those factors, how to assess them, and what proper steps to take, that's all very important when we're talking specifically about targeted violence, but also there's a lot that we can do with that in terms of suicide as well, because a lot of people who are suicidal, again, that is noticeable, that lead up to crisis is noticeable. And so it allows us to intervene before we reach that crisis point or before that crisis point becomes violent or fatal.
Again, for you, going to the problems we've talked about here in Washington, D.C., the average homicide suspect has been arrested 11 times prior to their committing a homicide. What role do progressive prosecutors who refuse to charge gun offenses and other violent crimes committed by criminals play in gun violence epidemic?
Yeah, so I will note that my colleagues, Coley Stimson and Zach Smith, have written extensively on this issue as well. Again, when we're talking about this small subset of repeat offenders who are overwhelmingly responsible, either directly or indirectly, for facilitating that crime, when you just release them back into their communities without prosecution, without any sort of detaining of them, you're releasing them to continue committing the exact same crimes over and over. And in some cases, it actually emboldens them because now they realize, well, I can probably get away with this. Statistically, even if I am arrested, I'm not going to be prosecuted. And if I am prosecuted, they're going to let me right back out. That's not deterrence at all. There is no deterrence factor. We are essentially eliminating any perceived reason for criminals to stop committing criminal actions.
Again, for you, in August, the Justice Department issued a proposed rule that would increase the number of folks who have to register for federal firearm license in order to do business that way. The rule says, quote, even a single firearm transaction or offer to engage in a transaction when combined with other evidence may be sufficient to require a license, end of quote. In April, Director Dettelbach told the House Judiciary Committee that when ATF writes its proposed rule, it, quote, looks at the law that Congress passes and the public safety threat to America, end of quote. In your opinion, does this new rule apply to the law as written by Congress? And if not, explain why you feel that way.
Thank you, Senator. And no, I think anytime you have a very slight wording change and the proposed regulations are essentially 108 pages explaining how it was sort of a way more significant, that should be a red flag immediately, that it's not actually consistent with the change in the law. I think most concerning are some of the sort of presumptions that ATF wants to now write in to say, look, if you do X, Y, and Z, it's presumed you needed an FFL even if you did it once, because it includes things like in selling the firearm with the original manufacturer's packaging. That packaging includes things that are essential for gun safety, including the user's manual and the original trigger locks that had to have been sold with it. To say that selling those items now means that you are suddenly an FFL when you would not have otherwise been, disincentivizes private unlicensed individuals from including that important safety info. So when we're looking at that sort of absurdity, we have a problem with the law, even above and beyond, do I think it reflects the federal statute? And I don't think it does.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Hirono.